Hello and welcome to Jerome Foundation's 2025 Work Sample Webinar. We're joining you today from the homeland of the Dakota people, Minnesota Makoche, also called Minnesota, and current home of 11 tribes, 4 Dakota and 7 Anishinaabe, and the lands of the Lenape, Munsee, Canarsie, and many other tribes in what is also called New York City. We honor and respect the tribal sovereignty, rights, and cultural resilience of the many Native and Indigenous peoples connected to these lands. I'm Eleanor Savage. I'm the president of Jerome Foundation, and I am pronoun flexible. I want to invite my Jerome colleagues to introduce yourselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is TA, and I'm a program officer at the Jerome Foundation based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I use she, her pronouns.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nell Augustin. I use she and they pronouns. I'm based in New York City, and I work as the program strategist at Jerome Foundation.
In this webinar, we'll be focusing on guidelines and best practices for work samples, specific to our 2025 film granting programs, and we hope more widely applicable for other opportunities. We do want to note that every grant program will have its own unique requirements, and you'll want to be familiar with the differences as you apply. If you're looking for comprehensive information about Jerome Foundation's film program, we encourage you to read the program and application guide or watch the webinar, both available on our website, and we'll share the link. We'll also share links to resources throughout this presentation, and you can find those in the video description.
So, why are work samples so important? They're your opportunity to share the work that you have created and directed. Note that work samples must be works that you have directed, not work you have edited, produced, acted in, written the screenplay for, etc. They are typically a required component of any grant application and are used by panelists to inform their assessment of your application. Because of the significance of work samples in the application, pay attention to the requirements and recommendations for work samples. It is essential. If you submit an ineligible work sample, your application will not be eligible. We recommend that you read through the program and application guide so you're familiar with the work sample requirements, and please reach out to Jerome staff if you have any questions. In terms of who will be reviewing your samples, first, Jerome staff reviews your work samples to ensure they are eligible. If your work samples and your application are eligible, it will go to review panelists. Review panels are comprised of a diverse range of film professionals, which can include directors, festival curators or programmers, executive directors or program directors of film organizations, and former Jerome grantees. Panels are assembled to cover a depth and breadth of aesthetics, methodologies, genres, practices, and ways of working. All have experience and an understanding of Minnesota and New York City filmmakers. Minnesota and New York City applicants are reviewed by separate panels. The panelists may or may not be familiar with your work before they see your application. Though we don't reveal specific panelists for a particular application review, you can view a list of past Jerome Foundation panelists on the website if you wish to learn more. Work samples are experienced online on a laptop or desktop computers of staff and panelists. It's rare that they would be screened on a large TV or in a screening room. For this grant program, each panelist typically reviews between 40 to 60 applications, so your work sample is viewed in a large batch with other applicants. For viewing purposes, we strongly recommend making it as easy as possible to access your work sample. If, for example, you use Vimeo to host the video, link directly to the video on Vimeo instead of to a page on your website that might have additional links to multiple videos. Also, please make sure that you do not move the work sample file to a different link, change the password to access the video, or change the privacy settings, which might make it impossible for reviewers to access your work. At Jerome, we'll work with you to resolve these kinds of issues instead of disqualifying your application, but bear in mind that may not be the case for other funders or programs. It might also be helpful to have someone who's not using your computer to test your links, both to make sure they work and that your passwords are correct. Sometimes it's hard to test it out on your own.
Here's a table delineating the different kinds of requirements for work samples and our two programs. For both, you must be credited as the director on all submitted work samples, and all work samples must be the work that you yourself have conceived and generated. For the Minnesota programs, applicants are required to provide 2 work samples of completed films that they have directed. One of the 2 work samples must be completed and publicly screened, not just self-presented, and made post-enrollment in a degree program if applicable. Applicants must provide information on the location or platform where the work has been screened. The second work sample must be completed, but there is no public screening requirement. It may be screened, self-presented, or not yet screened, and may also have been completed while you were in a degree granting program, if applicable. Public screening includes, but is not limited to, film festivals, presenting venues or community organizations, or online screening platforms with a juried or curated selection process, and/or through project grants. Films that have only been presented through a film director's own platforms or through uncurated sign-up or first-come, first-served formats are not considered publicly screened. Film directors who are entirely self-presented and who have no additional engagement opportunities with their community through public screenings, festivals, or competitive grants and prizes are not eligible. New York City applicants must provide 2 work samples of completed and publicly screened, not just self-presented, works and made also post-enrollment in degree granting program, if applicable. You'll identify 10 minutes over the 2 required work samples for panelists to view. The third work sample is optional for those applicants who are submitting works in progress footage of the project they're applying with. If you've started production on your project, we encourage you to include this sample, and you'll identify a 3-minute sequence for panelists to watch.
When thinking about what to use for your work samples, here are some things to keep in mind. Submit your strongest work samples. Panelists want to see a range of work demonstrating development over time, dedication to the field, craft, and potential. Panelists prefer work created within the last 5 years. The more recent, the better, although the foundation recognizes this may be challenging given the COVID pandemic. Older samples may be submitted with an explanation in the work sample context field. If you are applying as an individual, you must have sole directing credit on every work sample and be listed in the credits as the sole director. Projects done as part of a co-directing team are not eligible work samples and will not be considered. Projects for which you are the performer, writer, editor, producer, etc., but are not the director are also not eligible. If you are applying as a co-directing team, those listed in the application must share co-directing credits on every work sample, and the co-directing team must be consistent for all samples. That is, the composition of the team cannot change, even if additional directors are not part of the application. You may not submit works you or your colleagues directed individually, directed without you, or directed with additional other people. A note regarding episodic or web series. Please do not use the same episode or web series for both work samples, even if they are different episodes. The panel wants to see a range of work. Samples should also be real-time sequences of your film and completed work. And here is a list of ineligible work samples. Including any of these as a work sample will make your application ineligible. Trailers, sizzle reels, promo videos, highlight reels, pitch tapes, proofs of concept or interviews about your work, commercials, industrial films, work for hire, music videos, or any work for hire that you created at the direction of a client or producer, and for which you do not have creative control, even if this is commissioned work. News segments or video clips produced for journalistic purposes. Films created for team-based contests or for short-term festival projects, such as a 24-hour film slam or 48-hour film fest. Episodic or web-based series for which you are not the creator and director. And finally, work that you produced or edited or acted in but did not direct, and any work for which you do not have primary creative control.
In the application, we ask for Vimeo or YouTube links to the full work if possible. Again, trailers are not permitted. While we will identify an excerpt for the panel to watch, some panelists will also like to jump around and see different parts of the work. So to see what leads up to the sequence and how it may be resolved. Having access to the complete film allows for this possibility and for panelists to answer questions that they may have about your work. You'll be asked to indicate your cue-in point for each sample, including a start and stop time for your excerpt. For example, start at 3 minutes, 30 seconds and end at 8 minutes. If no start and stop time is provided, panelists will begin watching at the beginning of the video and have full discretion as to when to stop viewing. You may only provide one clip for work sample and cannot provide multiple clips for the same film. For example, you cannot ask panelists to start at 1 minute and go to 2 minutes and then jump to 8 minutes and then go to 12 minutes. Panelists want to see uninterrupted sequences of your work. You will also provide a description, including the name of the work, year completed, running time, where the work has been publicly screened, and any awards or grants that have been received in support of the project, if applicable. You will also provide your role or roles in the project. Please note that you must be credited as the director. You can have other additional roles like editor, producer that you may list. And you will also provide the work sample context field in your application, which gives you 150 words to share information about your work samples. This is an opportunity to seize. Panelists may not know you or your work, and they are dropping in for a short segment of the entire film. So providing context helps panelists understand the significance of the sample that you're sharing. Think of this as a way to connect the dots and clearly describe to the panel what you want them to know about your work. This can include a brief logline or description of the film that you're sharing a clip of, and any important information about the sections of work occurring either right before or right after the sample clip as to where it fits into the entire film. Context should add to what the panel sees and not tell them what they're going to see. There's no point to do a description of exactly what happens or transpires. Instead, you might offer explanations for elements that might not be clearly perceptible in the work samples, but are related to your goals as a filmmaker and what you share in the application questions. You may also draw panelists' attention to specific elements of your work. You could say, for example, that the sample shows what you're doing with sound design or visual effects, or with single long camera takes. You can also point out anything to prioritize or note about your work sample itself. For example, you may say that you're working on a specific technique that will be important to the proposed film, and that this work sample demonstrates the way that you are building a dream montage or flashback sequence. Panelists also value filmmakers' candor and self-awareness as early career directors. Please be open about any production issues in your sample. For example, you may say, the sample shows my direction and intimacy work with actors in an emotionally complex moment. I know the sound mix is off, and I'm working with a new sound designer and editor to improve the balance. This is setting up panelists to view the sample from your lens, and it's also where you may explain why you're submitting a work sample that is older than 5 years if you choose to do so.
Beyond the videos and the contextual information, a script sample from the proposed project is required for narrative films or hybrid films with a narrative focus. You will be asked to upload the proposed project script, PDF. The script allows the panel to gauge the quality of the writing and assess your ability to create character, structure, rhythm, etc. This can be in partial or in draft form. If you work in narrative form but are still in the storyboarding phase, the panel will not have enough information to consider your proposal, and you should not apply in this round. Given the production focus of this grant program, having a script is key. If you work in narrative film but do not work from scripts and instead rely on an improvised process, you must explain that process and submit an alternative to the script sample, possibly an improvisational structure or outline, that helps the panel assess your skills in directing unscripted work. You are also strongly encouraged to make sure that one of your 2 work samples was developed through this improvised process. An optional upload for films in any genre is a storyboard, lookbook, visual concept, or project outline. These supplemental materials can be especially helpful if you don't have a work in progress work sample. It allows panelists to gauge how you are developing the project, character, structure, rhythm, and visual concepts, etc.
We want to spend a moment on how you are credited in the films that you submit. It's central to determining whether your work sample is eligible, and we're highlighting this here because it's an issue that has resulted in a significant number of applications being disqualified. We want to be extra clear. If you are applying as an individual director, you must be the sole director of all work samples that you submit. This means that you must be listed as the sole director in the credits. Films that are done as part of a co-directing team are not eligible work samples. You must own the copyright of the production and have artistic, budgetary, and editorial control over the film. And films for which you are an actor, performer, writer, editor, producer, etc., but are not also the director, are not eligible. If we find that you're not the sole director, your application will be disqualified. Again, in the hopes of being as clear as possible about crediting requirements, I'll go through a couple of illustrations to explain the difference between credits for individual applicants and credits for co-directing teams. So on screen here, you'll see if you're an individual applicant, the directing credit in both of your work sample descriptions and the film credits in both of your work samples must match exactly and must consist solely of your name. On this slide, you'll see in the green blocks at the top that work sample 1 and work sample 2 were both directed by Pepper and Zanelli, and no one else is listed as a director. This illustration represents a pair of eligible work samples. Below that, you'll see that the first work sample is directed by Pepper Zanelli and Sam Maker. So work sample 2 is directed solely by Pepper Zanelli. In this instance, work sample 1 is not eligible, and even though work sample 2 is eligible, the entire application would be considered ineligible because you're required to have 2 work samples. If you're applying as a co-directing team of 2, those listed in the application must share co-directing credits on every work sample, and the co-directing team must be consistent for all samples. So films you or your co-applicant directed individually are not eligible, and films directed with other people are not eligible. You must be listed as the only co-directors in the credits, and you must own together the copyright of the production and have artistic, budgetary, and editorial control over the film. Films for which one or both of you are the actor, performer, writer, editor, producer, but are not also the directors, are not eligible. And again, we'll take a look here. When it comes to co-directing teams, the directing credit in both of your work sample descriptions and the film credits on both of your work samples must match exactly and must consist of the 2 names on the application and only the 2 names on the application. So in this slide, you can see in the green blocks at the top that work sample 1 and work sample 2 were both directed by Tyree Corwin and Brian Jones, and no one else is listed as a director. The illustration represents a pair of eligible work samples. And below, you'll see the first work sample is directed by Tyree Corwin, Brian Jones, and Alicia Henry. Work sample 2 is directed only by Tyree Corwin. In this sample, both work samples are ineligible, and the application would not be considered further by the panel.
We want to share some suggestions for work samples that we have heard from panelists over the years. These are suggestions, not requirements, but we hope that you'll find them helpful. First, start your application and work sample selection well in advance of the deadline. Don't throw it together the day before. Working in advance gives you time to get feedback. Show your work samples to at least one other person who knows nothing about your project for feedback to determine if your samples are effectively conveying what it is that you'd like to share. Also, if there's someone you worked with who knows the entire film, ask them about your sample. They might have additional ideas of compelling scenes to include. Working in advance also allows you to ask questions of Jerome staff and sort through any technical issues that you may have with the application. Always submit what you feel is your best work and choose compelling sequences. So what is a compelling sequence? This depends on the type of work that you're making, but generally it's a scene that may draw the viewer into the world of the film. It could be one that reveals the complexity of a film participant or character and gives a sense of the emotional stakes or includes a punchline or a moment of discovery or transformation. It could also show your strong visual aesthetic and gives a sense of the pacing. Panelists are looking at 40 to 60 samples, so you really want to capture their attention and definitely do not start with a credit sequence. Consider that your work samples are in conversation with your written responses to application. Panelists have shared that they appreciate candor and applicants who can give an honest self-assessment of the strengths and weaknesses and opportunities in their work. Be intentional in talking about the way that your work samples connect with your proposed project. Sometimes the filmmaker's written application is very strong, but the work sample doesn't live up or deliver on the promise of the application. In other cases, the written application isn't maybe clear, but an outstanding work sample can help turn it around and provide clarification. Share samples that expand the panel's knowledge and understanding of the project rather than replicating what's already been written. Think about the breadth and depth of your work. Select work samples that resonate and demonstrate your capacity for the project that you're applying for. If you're submitting an application for an experimental documentary animation, think about other works that you have already created that demonstrate how you are combining these forms. Similarly, if you're working on a narrative film that involves humor, show samples that help demonstrate your use of comedy and humor. Panelists want to see a range of work demonstrating development over time, your dedication to the field, craft, and potential. This is where having an outside eye on what you're choosing can be helpful.
Remember, applications are due before 4 p.m. Central and 5 p.m. Eastern on Thursday, April 3rd. Late applications will not be accepted, and all applicants will be notified of their status no later than October 20th, 2025.
Thanks, everyone, and we wish you the best with your application.